friends, and welcome to Ariel's Twilight Years, how to be a really old model. Oh, I forgot to put my hair down, which is going to completely change the production values of this video. I am at home this month, and in fact, I've spent the last 3 weeks under the impression that I might have colon cancer, and yesterday I went through a diagnostic procedure in hospital, and it turns out I do not have colon cancer, which is lovely. So I have not been particularly communicative, and I haven't been able to bear to make a YouTube video because I was suspicious that my YouTube video this month was going to have to be announcing that I was about to have massive surgery and chemotherapy and all sorts of awful things. So I'm not sure what is wrong with me. I have more tests that I have to go through, but the thing that I was most worried about and that I had the most symptoms of has now been ruled out, which is a huge relief. So shout out to my lovely sister, Imogen Howson, who came to stay with me because Howell is away. So she took me to hospital and was as kind a big sister as you could possibly wish for. But one of the reasons I've been scared over the last 3 weeks is the subject for this video. Because whenever I have to go and have medical treatment, I'm scared, like I'm sure a lot of us are, about what the outcome will be, and I'm sometimes scared about how much some of the procedures might hurt, but I'm scared about something else as well. And the reason for that is the job that I do. So today I want to tell you a story about facing discrimination because of my job. And I know that this is just an anecdote. The reason I'm telling the story is not because I suffered so terribly, or because I think what happened to me is so incredibly important, but because I suspect that from what happened to me, this might be an issue that other models have come up against or may come across in the future. So I wanted to talk about it in order to maybe help you if you're a model who experiences anything in the future, because if only I'd been prepared, I would have dealt a lot better with it. So here is my story about discrimination from a medical professional. In 2011, I'd been suffering from recurrent bouts of cystitis, urinary tract infections, for a couple of years. It had got very bad, so the symptoms didn't go away in between infections, and I was in a lot of pain all the time. It was very hard to work. I did mostly manage to carry on modelling through it, but only by taking a lot of painkillers, which weren't particularly effective, by drinking a lot of water, by doing all the things that those of us who suffer with urinary tract infections will be familiar with. It had interfered with my sex life, it had interfered with my enjoyment of life generally, and so eventually, of course, I was referred to various people to check what was going on. I had lots of scans, I had a cystoscopy, I saw various consultants, and eventually I saw a consultant who was very kind and very helpful. And after the appointment, I received a letter to tell me that I had been diagnosed with a urethral diverticulum, which was treatable. And I remember I cried when I got the letter because I'd been in so much pain for over 2 years at that point. And I got a diagnosis and I could go and look it up, and I knew what the treatment was, and it wasn't very nice, but it was surgery and I was going to be okay, probably. And I couldn't wait to go back to the hospital for my appointment to find out what happened next, how much time I needed to take off work, how quickly I could have the surgery, what my chances were of getting everything resolved. So this day I went to the hospital and I was on my way to work. So I was dressed the way we models often dress on the way to work, in clothes that wouldn't leave marks on my body. So not very different from my pyjamas, to be honest. I was wearing a pink tracksuit trousers and a pink and white top, none of which would leave marks on my body. So I wasn't wearing underwear, but no one was going to know that because I wasn't getting undressed. I had all my makeup done and my hair done because I was on my way to a shoot, but I was dressed down, and now I realise I will never do that again when I go for anything medical. And when I was ushered into the room to see the doctor, it wasn't the doctor I'd seen before, it was a junior doctor, and he told me that I did not have a urethral diverticulum at all. I'd been sent the letter in error, and that they still didn't know what was wrong with me, and that I was going to have to just go home, experiment with taking paracetamol more often, drink more water or try drinking less water. So basically, they were telling me there was no treatment, there was no way to solve it, there was no diagnosis, and there was critically no pain relief. And having thought that I was about to get a solution, I was absolutely devastated, and I had had no expectation at all of getting that news that day. So I cried, and I think because he was quite a junior doctor, he thought perhaps he needed to get a more senior doctor to talk through my options with me, because he seemed very unsure of what else I could do. So he went and got a more senior doctor, who I will not name, but I'm contacting him privately, as I will get on to later. And what he did was he ushered me into his office, and the first thing he asked me was what I did for a living. And I said I was a professional model. And he said a really super weird thing, looking back on it. He said, "Oh, do you get much work?" I mean, why that would matter. And the fact was, in 2011, I was booked up 9 months in advance. I was very busy. I was working every day. I wasn't very well, but I was working every day. And so I said, yes, thank you. And the next thing he said to me remains one of the most offensive things anyone has said to me in my adult life. He said, "Okay, so when did you last use?" And I was so confused. I had no idea what he meant at all. And I said, "Use what?" And he said, and I remember this, I've got a really vivid memory for conversation, and so I remember anything that was important. I tend to remember it verbatim. And he just said, "Oh, come on, when did you last use ketamine?" And I had no idea what ketamine was at the time. I'd never heard that word. And I said, "What's ketamine?" And he was like, "Oh, come on." And I said, "No, seriously, what is ketamine?" So he explained that it's a drug, I think it's a horse tranquilizer, like veterinary medicine, that apparently at the time was being used recreationally. Now, the reason he brought that up was firstly because I was a model, and it turned out this was like at the time, a kind of real sort of party girl drug, and he presumably thought models were basically party girls, party goers. But the other reason he brought it up, to be fair to him, was that it did sometimes cause bladder symptoms in people. So I just denied it. I continued to deny it because I'd never taken any recreational drugs at all at that point. And I was just baffled as to where the conversation had gone to. So he eventually, in the face of my bafflement, said, "Oh, all right, I'll believe you." And I'll always remember that he said, "I'll believe you," not "I believe you," because it meant he didn't. Like, it meant that he was going to push that aside, think of me as a drug user, but pretend I wasn't one in my mind. And I felt so humiliated because I realised he hadn't asked anything about my medical history. He hadn't asked anything about my actual lifestyle. If he had, he would have understood very quickly that my modelling career was not me going to parties in London. My modelling career was actual modelling. And his stereotypical idea of what a professional model does, how well she looks after her body, was entirely wrong, but also just so negative and so upsetting and so humiliating. So he did go on to give me further tests, to his credit, and he didn't find a diagnosis, which I really don't blame him for so much, because I think that it probably wasn't his area of specialisation, and it took me many more years before I got a diagnosis and consequently a treatment plan, and the quality of my life improved after that. But ever since, when I go to medical appointments of any sort, like GP, anything, I try to arm myself against something like this happening to me again, because I am a professional model. That's what it says on any record that anyone has kept of my profession. That's what I do. And it makes me feel like perhaps when we meet people who are prejudiced, that means that their starting point with us is to assume that we are somehow kind of irresponsible, not proper adults, not proper professionals. And so when I go to medical appointments, I try to dress like the opposite of that assumption. So I wear my fanciest, most formal, most expensive clothes. And I think what I'm trying to do is make myself look as though perhaps my husband is a medical doctor, in the hope that at least they might treat that sort of woman with some respect. And ever since, I have been treated well, and I hope that's not because of how I've dressed. I hope that's just because most medical professionals would not be such absolute blinkered wankers. But I'm scared, and I'll always be scared. So the kindness and humanity of the medical professionals I met at Shrewsbury Hospital yesterday means a great deal to me. But when one of them asked me what I did for a living yesterday, I said I was an author. So I think that perhaps my fear is still there, and perhaps my fear is not unfounded. And of course, in the years since, I have also prepared myself for if anybody is that disrespectful to me about my job, or anything really, again. So if this was to happen to me today, as well as being dressed like a like a country GP's wife, I would also be prepared to call them out on that discriminatory way of thinking. And I just wish I'd said to him, when he said, "Oh, come on, you're a model, when did you last use ketamine?" I wish I'd said, "Oh, come on, you're a medical doctor, are you an alcoholic?" Because those two assumptions are equally unfair and equally well-founded. I believe quite a lot of medical doctors have alcohol problems, like he believes quite a lot of models are on ketamine. Neither of us know about that field properly, and so we are basing these opinions on stereotypes and hearsay, and they are both equally offensive, and I wish I had done that. But what I've done instead is I've written him a letter, which I wrote a couple of years ago and have updated and have never sent to him, because I'm aware that receiving a letter like this would not be the jolliest thing in the world for anybody. And I don't want to spoil his day, because I understand that his job must be really difficult. And I understand that drug users might not be honest about it. But I did write to him because the idea of him hurting and humiliating another young professional model in the future is pretty intolerable to me. So I'm just going to read you what I have written to him, and I suggest that if you have experienced something similar, that you do the same. Dear Mr. 13 years ago, I had an appointment with you at the Royal Berkshire Hospital. For context, at the time, I'd been suffering with cystitis symptoms for over 2 years. Following a scan, I'd phoned the hospital for results and had been told that I had a urethral diverticulum. I'd been very grateful for the news, having been in considerable pain that had so far not been brought under control, and having not been able to have a normal sexual relationship for the last couple of years. Fixed that problem. When I arrived for my appointment, which initially wasn't with you, I was told that I'd actually been given the information in error, and in fact I didn't have a urethral diverticulum. The doctor I saw began suggesting that I should try drinking more, drinking less, or taking more paracetamol. Of course, having been in a lot of pain for a fairly long period, I had already experimented with all these options. The idea of being sent away to try to manage the pain and other symptoms alone was overwhelming. Because I was crying, he went to find you, presumably in the hope that you'd be able to think of something other than paracetamol as a solution to my 2 years of pain and internal bleeding. I understand that your job must be full of challenges that people who aren't in your profession wouldn't be aware of. But in 2019, I finally did receive a diagnosis of interstitial cystitis following a cystoscopy and biopsy. And I can't help but wonder why you thought it was appropriate to speak to me the way you did. I'm a professional model. At the time you met me, I'd been working as a model for 7 years. You asked me what I did for a living, and when I told you, you asked me, when did you last use? I had no idea what you meant. You expanded. Oh, come on, when did you last use ketamine? I had never heard of ketamine. I had most certainly never used it or any other recreational drug. I told you so. And you said, all right, I'll believe you. Not I believe you, I'll believe you, which implied to me that you didn't. Now, having read up on the subject, I understand that ketamine can cause bladder symptoms, and of course it's a valid question for you to have asked. But the way in which you asked, your unwillingness to believe me, and your assumption based on my career choice that I was a recreational drug user was upsetting and humiliating. I was not and never had been a recreational drug user. Furthermore, I didn't know any professional models who were. I was simply suffering from interstitial cystitis and it wasn't my fault. My lifestyle choices hadn't caused the condition. My family has a history of urinary tract problems and I'd suffered recurrent bladder infections for my entire life, as you'd have found out if you'd asked anything about my medical history. The day that I met you, found out that there wasn't, after all, a surgical solution for my pain and was accused of being a drug user because of my job, was one of the most unhappy of my life. You told me to stop crying and to be glad I didn't have cancer. I am glad that I don't have cancer, but on that particular day it was no comfort. I'd never thought that I did have cancer. I was in pain that I couldn't control and thought my hospital appointment was to discuss surgery to solve the problem, and instead I was being advised to experiment with how much water I was drinking and to take painkillers. You did eventually offer me a cystoscopy, which you undertook a few weeks later, and you told me that there was no sign of interstitial cystitis. I understand that IC probably isn't your area of specialisation, and I know the evidence of my IC may well be easier to identify now than it was then. I'm not blaming you for not diagnosing it, but I do want to say that if you deal with professional models in the future, please don't make these kind of assumptions about our lifestyle. I think that your belief that I took recreational drugs stopped you from listening to what I was actually telling you about my lifestyle and symptoms, and I believe that this contributed towards my not receiving the treatment that I needed for 10 more years. Models like me get most of our work through touring. At the time, I toured, working every day for 12 to 18 days in a row between going home to rest. I shot each day for 8 hours and often drove for 3 or 4 hours. In my downtime, I did all my administration since I'm self-represented. To be a professional model into your 30s and 40s, you need to look after your body. I don't drink alcohol and I make responsible nutrition choices. I don't go to parties and nightclubs. I don't take party drugs. I don't do any of the things that you appear to believe models do. I just work long hours, try to look after my health so I can keep getting bookings, and go to bed early so that I can keep doing my job well, even though for the last 13 years I've been dealing with daily constant pain, which has been very tiring. I imagine that maybe my life as a model doesn't differ very much from the life of any other hard-working professional with a chronic illness, and I wanted to write this letter to you in the hope that perhaps you'd consider being more careful about your assumptions around your patients' lifestyles in the future. In 2010, I needed your help, and your believing me would have perhaps made it easier for me to get a diagnosis. Please don't treat future models in this manner. Yours sincerely, Ariel Angry. So I think it's time to send this letter to him, because I think that I will always feel like I haven't done my best by future models if I don't. So that's what I'm going to do, and that's what I wanted to say. I'd love to hear any stories from models who have experienced similar things, because in some ways it will be quite comforting to think that this was a complete one-off, but I suspect it probably isn't. If anyone ever needs help writing something similar to a medical professional or anyone else who treats them in a similar way, please by all means let me know. And as always, you can contact me by email on kinkyarielanderssen@gmail.com. My book, forthcoming memoir, Playing to Lose, is still available for pre-order, and I'm working on the edit as we speak. And I'll be back with more hints, tips, tricks, and stories about my life as a professional model next month. Please like, subscribe, and all that glorious stuff. But most of all, if you are a medical doctor, please, for the love of God, do not talk to us like this. Thanks for listening. Bye!